Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our COVID conversations. I guess that's kind of what this is. We are a Luta Continua. My name is Anya, and I'm here with my colleague Kaz, and we are part of the production team for Luta. Today, we are joining in a conversation with the Haki Compost Collective, representatives Danica and Dawit, and we're going to have a conversation on environmental justice. So thank you both for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I know it's kind of a crazy time, but we are really looking forward to having this conversation, learning more about what you do and how you've been. So why don't we go ahead and just get started with like brief introductions, names, pronouns, what you're doing right now, and then we can talk a little bit about your collective. Why don't we start with Danica?
All right. Well, as Anya introduced me, my name is Danica Lamb and my pronouns are she, her. And I want to start by just saying a thank you to Luta Continua and the entire team for inviting me to participate in this. This is really exciting. And to start, I guess I would just say that I, like Dawit, am a humble resident of Roosevelt Island, and I am a community organizer here and am one of the co-founders of Haki Compost Collective, which I guess I can do a little bit of an intro into more kind of after everybody else has introduced themselves, just since it might be a little bit on the longer side. I'll try to keep it brief, but I want to give everybody a chance to kind of jump in before I launch into that.
Thank you, Danica, for that wonderful intro. My name is Daud Kifamari. I go by the pronouns of he, him. I'm originally from Burundi and Eritrea, but I've grown up a majority of my life on Roosevelt Island, New York City, and I am also one of the co-founders of the Haki Compost Collective. And separate from my work with Haki Compost, I consider myself to be, I'm an environmental educator at a nonprofit called Solar One in New York City, as well as I'm a musician, aspiring musician whose music is really kind of at the intersection of Afro-optimism and using lyrics and music to create community and avenues for creating a positive future. So that's a little bit about myself.
Fire. This is I'm already so excited to hear about this. Y'all know me. My name is Kaz. I use they, them pronouns. And as Anya said in the beginning, I'm a co-creative producer at Luta Continua Dialogues, interested in bringing revolutionaries, activists, artists like yourselves together in conversation to speak about how to improve our global situation, but specifically today to cover environmental justice and the local wonderful stuff y'all are doing already from home. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it back over to Anya to get us started with our discussion today.
Thank you. And thank you all for your introductions. So as you mentioned, you're both from the Haki Compost Collective, which is from Roosevelt Island in New York. So I know that a lot of people aren't really familiar with the city structure system of New York City in particular, especially us. We have a very global community that we welcome in. So if you could just tell us a little bit about creating a compost collective, why it was necessary and what the origin story was, and where that brings you now.
Yeah, so I can jump in on that. So Roosevelt Island, for those who don't know, is this tiny sliver of an island in the East River, kind of between Midtown Manhattan and Queens. We are known for our famous Roosevelt Island tram, but believe it or not, many New York residents actually have never been to Roosevelt Island. A lot of people say when they find out that I live here, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that people live there. But we're here. And so Haki Compost Collective, I guess first I should just kind of summarize what compost is for folks who don't know. Compost is organic recycling, basically. So taking organic matter, whether that's stuff coming out of your kitchen, food scraps, or stuff coming out of your yard or parks like wood chips or leaves and things like that. And, through different methods, turning that into this final product called compost, which is this really nutrient-rich soil amendment. It looks like dirt, but we call it black gold because it has all of these amazing nutrients in it that when you put it back into the ground, you know, it basically feeds all of the future plants that you want to grow. And so back in 2019, which I guess at this point was 2 years ago now, I was actually working as the local compost coordinator on Roosevelt Island for the nonprofit Grow NYC. And so I was managing our food scrap drop off. And unfortunately in March, and here's my cat, when the coronavirus hit, unfortunately all of the food scrap drop off sites throughout the city had to be shut down, at first for safety reasons, but then because of budget cuts that came. And so as soon as that happened, Dawit, myself, and a few other really dedicated, you know, islanders that are really concerned about sustainability kind of put our heads together and asked ourselves, how do we bring composting back to our community? Because to us, it really is an essential service. And that's because, you know, amid this climate crisis, you know, we're in this pandemic, which is a public health crisis, but that's on top of this climate crisis. And so we need to figure out how to address both. And composting is one of the biggest things that each of us as individuals, but also as communities, can do to actually reduce our contributions to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so Haki Compost Collective was put together as basically just a group of people trying to solve this problem of bringing composting back to the island. And we were exploring a few different avenues, but one of the biggest things that has actually come to fruition most recently is that we've been able to bring our food scrap drop-off site back to the island since September of 2020, thanks to our relationship with a local nonprofit. And so that has been, you know, in the last few months, our biggest focus. And what I'll say about what's exciting about that is now that it has returned, it looks very different from what it was before. I mentioned that I was actually an employee staffing that site, but now again, because of budget cuts, we've had to really, you know, radically change how we operate, where we don't actually have any funding for managing our site. So everyone is a volunteer, and that's super exciting because now we have the community taking ownership of this site and collecting food scraps. And then what's amazing about that too is that we get to pair it with community building as well. So I like to say that Haki Compost Collective is a composting and community building initiative. So that's my brief but also still long-winded introduction to Haki Compost.
That's wonderful. And you've touched on so many important aspects of this, which is about like awareness and community building and the idea of like what we assign to be an essential service and who gets the authority to assign it as well. Because you've kind of taken this into your own hands and saying, this is something that our community needs and we're not going to wait for somebody else to do it. We'll do it ourselves. Can you, like maybe Dawi, if you want to speak a little bit to it as well, like what got you started in composting in the first place? Because it sounds like you have a lot of people who are coming together that were already very dedicated to this craft. So I'm wondering a little bit about like your stance on that and how you got involved in it in the first place, and then what brought you to help build the collective.
So just riffing off of Danica's amazing response there. So actually what got me first interested in composting was when I graduated from the New School in 2019, I was an environmental studies major. And one of my first jobs out of university was I was actually also working for Grow NYC as a compost coordinator. And majority of the sites that I was working at was 125th Street in Harlem, East Harlem, and then on 138th Street up in the Bronx. And so that's where I first started learning about composting and started learning about how, you know, this diverting food scraps out of landfills and returning them back to soils is actually one of the main ways that as communities we can help to, you know, address this climate crisis. And a lot of, I guess, what I've been trying to do, what I learned at Grow NYC and what I've been trying to also I guess, inject into the Haki Compost Collective at our food scrap drop-off site. So we have a food scrap drop-off site that operates from 9 a.m. to about 2:30 every Saturday on Roosevelt Island. And it's actually located next to where we have a green farmers market and a few other local vendors from the community. So it's like this really amazing ecosystem where every Saturday people come together to get their groceries, drop off their food scraps, And I kind of tried my best to use my background in environmental education to help kind of explain to people what food scraps are, how keeping food scraps out of landfills reduces greenhouse gas emissions, what are greenhouse gas emissions in the first place, what is the climate system, and since I kind of have the floor, I guess I'll touch a little bit on that. So basically, our climate system is a diverse relationship of our atmosphere, of our aquatic systems, and our terrestrial systems that moderate the amount of solar radiation that the planet absorbs that creates a suitable living environment for human beings here on Earth. The climate has always actually been in fluctuation. If we go back as late as 65 million years ago to the Paleozoic era, all the way to the Cenozoic era during the Jurassic period when dinosaurs were inhabiting the Earth, and then after they got extinct. So taking this fast forward to where we are now, a lot of the arguments that people who are climate skeptics are saying is that, you know, the climate has always been fluctuating, species have always been coming and going, but what we have realized in the 21st century was that ever since human beings managed to actually tap into fossil fuels, hence the word fossil fuels, these energy sources from millions of years ago that contain a lot of, they're really dense in energy, but what ends up happening is that when we burn them, coal, oil, natural gas, they emit these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, in terms of explaining our climate system, and I just want to explain this because it's really important to demystify this, is that within our atmosphere, we have these naturally occurring gases that Danica was talking about, these greenhouse gases. And these greenhouse gases live in the troposphere, which is the closest layer of the atmosphere to the planet, where all of our weather is created. And they absorb a certain amount of solar radiation from the sun that creates a warm enough, suitable temperature climate for us to be able to live on planet Earth, suitable to our species and the species that we live amongst. But when we burn these fossil fuels, when we start to emit more of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, this means that we are increasing the amount of solar radiation that's being absorbed by our climate system, by our atmospheres, warming up the climate near Earth surfaces, which has cascading effects in terms of melting the ice caps on the northern poles of our planet, which has an effect on our water system, the mixing of salt water and fresh water, which has a cascading effect in terms of ocean acidification, which then has another cascading effect in terms of rising sea levels. And for all these coastal communities that have a lot of these urban developments, when we have an intense hurricane or an intense tsunami or storm that destroys homes, that destroys power lines, and that become a lot of, that become great kind of economic challenges for governments, we start to see that human beings in the 21st century have become driving actors in shaping the climate system. And interestingly enough, diverting food scraps out of landfills is one of the main ways as individuals and as communities that we can reduce the emissions of these greenhouse gases. So at our food scrap drop-off site, depending on how curious, I guess, our residents are in kind of learning about the climate system and greenhouse gases and how food scraps ending up in landfills emits more greenhouse gases, we try to engage in those conversations and, you know, to help kind of demystify what climate change is, because I feel like there's a lot of confusion around it. And the more that we can demystify it, the more people can start to kind of take action in their personal lives in terms of addressing it. And I feel like that's at the intersection of what Haki is trying to do. And this is also kind of really important for me because I know that communities of color are being disproportionately impacted by climate change. I know that when it comes to environmental sustainability, renewable energy retrofits within buildings, sustainable agricultural policies, that our communities tend to be left out of those conversations. And being somebody who's been afforded the chance to go to university and learn about these topics, I'm trying my best at where I am currently in my life to be able to bring awareness to this climate crisis and to also find a way to engage more people in the community of color community to get involved. And that's also a lot of what we're trying to do at Haki. So not to go too overboard, but that's a little bit about my engagement with Haki and why it's important to me.
Wow, no, that's incredible. I really resonate with that last point that you made in terms of like spreading information and like disseminating some of this sort of eroding the barrier that sometimes comes up in academic spaces about like what the environmental issues are, but also what the justice can look like. I agree, a lot of us are left out of that conversation, so I think it's really awesome that these the Haki Compost Collective and Grow NYC, is that what it was called? But yeah, I think that's really awesome to have those spaces where it's actual people who are being affected, who are directly involved in the education process. And something else that you touched on, which I thought was really cool, was this sort of like simultaneous process of understanding the Earth's response to all of the emissions into the atmosphere, understanding the process that the Earth itself goes through to sort of try and, if not clean that out, bring to our attention what's happening. But also wrapped up in that is like this very inherent need to build community and sustain community, which I think is often the missing link in a lot of these conversations. Like, how do we actually, come together as a collective to address these issues? So I appreciate that analysis, and Danica earlier, sort of the breakdown of what Haki Compost Collective does in terms of actually really engaging residents and making people feel like, this is our home. We have a home to protect, and it's as much the earth itself as it is each other. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I want to just say thank you for everybody who's spoken so far, because it's such a wonderful conversation. It makes me think about so much, and especially I think that we're a very hyper specialized society. We live in one, especially when you're in New York. It is very industrial, and so the estrangement to the earth is real. Even though I think a lot of us, may work extra hard to kind of return and to understand the environment in which we live, it can be very challenging sometimes because we have a cityscape that's in front of us. And for those of us that also, like, depending on where your family's from, like, I have family on the islands in the Caribbean. And I remember I was telling David this in a conversation the other week when I went back and I got to travel for the first time and like be with my family there. And that space was completely different. It was like learning the environment all over again. And that's something really beautiful about that. But the estrangement is real. And so even in the work that we do, sometimes often people will say, well, I live in a city and they'll take care of these things and we have services for those things and I don't have to do it because it's not my responsibility to fix anything. Right? I can't possibly, as an individual, fix all of the problems in the world. But I think it's also about understanding how you contribute to the community that you're a part of, more so than saying, oh, well, I'm going to save the entire planet by recycling this. Well, you should want to participate in the recycling program that your community has built because of the principle of the program and because you believe that it is going to do better and that it's going to do good for the community that you're in. And so by creating this kind of educational program, like first of all, I had a whole class lesson just now sitting and listening to Adawi, and I really appreciate it because I want the language, I want the vocabulary too. But it also makes people feel empowered. You feel stronger. It's like going to a gym and getting a workout, even in the little practices that we do in the day-to-day conversations that we have around the kitchen table. These are the things that empower us to change our futures. So it is very clear that you're creating something that is multifaceted, that has a lot of layers in it, because it's not just about an essential service. It is that, and it's adding more to it by saying, look how embedded this service is in creating community. And look how much it educates people, and how education does not just go within the classroom, but it actually is in all of these different spaces. And this is one that we're creating. And I think that is very, very impressive. So thank you again for that. And I think on that note, I want to ask, like, what kind of things do you do to build community? Like, how do you find volunteers and how do you create the kind of structure, if you have a structure, for the Haki Compost Collective?
All right, I feel like there were maybe 3 different questions folded into there. And I guess I'll start with the last one in terms of the structure, because this is something that we as a group have kind of talked a lot about, especially at the beginning of starting the collective, that we didn't really want it to be a formal organization, with specific boundaries of who's in it and who's not, and especially around whether we wanted to be a nonprofit or not. And that was something that we specifically said that we don't want to be. And this is coming from my personal perspective, is that, nonprofits do great work, many of them do, and I don't want to take away from that at all, but at the same time, nonprofits are part of this, this nonprofit industrial complex, that they're still beholden to capitalism, right? And so what we're trying to do at Haki is, this is really an experiment, right? This is an experiment of how we can organize as a community outside the realm of capitalism, how we can come together, build something, redistribute wealth outside of the systems that were handed down to us because they're not working for us. And so kind of flowing out of that, out of not having, this 501c3 tax, classification, or having these formal boundaries, the organization of what Haki is kind of like this living organism. We just have this flow of people coming in and out as they please, as it fits their life, as it seems appropriate to them, as they learn more. And then, they come and go and contribute what they can. And so I like to think that, all of the people that drop off their food scraps are members of the collective. Anybody that has attended any of our events or, contributed anything at all to the work that we do, they're part of that collective because they're part of our community. And in terms of finding volunteers, so I would say, I think the number since we started up again in September is that we've, apart from the core group of kind of organizers that we already had, we've added 19 new volunteers to the collective that actively help service our food scrap drop-off every week, which is super exciting because these are all people that have just, seen what we're doing at our big kind of smelly green bins each Saturday and got curious and wanted to get involved. And so Dawi and I have actually trained all of those volunteers ourselves, and so they actually help us staff the site each week. And most of those people, I think, have just come from conversations on the street. And that's the really cool thing about having the food scrap drop off. And what we noticed before things ended up shutting down in March was that we had this momentum to the point where the drop off site was kind of like the community watering hole, or like the office water cooler, of people would come by to drop off their scraps, but they would see people that they know and they would have conversations and they would, trade the latest news or gossip or whatever it might be. And so we saw that as an opportunity when we brought things back, that we could actually utilize that space, make the most of that space where we could bring people together and have people learn about things. So we've gotten our volunteers from just having conversations with people at the food scrap drop-off site. But then that also kind of segues into the programming that we've put on, where we thought, why don't we, around this food scrap drop-off, build out, opportunities for genuine human connection, for learning about each other. And examples of that have been, we actually did a voter registration drive, leading up to this, super important election. And we registered some new voters. And then, in October, we did an Indigenous Peoples Day reflection the weekend leading up to Indigenous Peoples Day, because it was really essential for us to unpack, whose land are we on and whose land are we stewarding in this work of composting our food scraps. And that actually also ties into a really important point that I do want to make about the name of the collective. Haki Compost Collective came out of a relationship that we have with the Lenape Center. Because in the planning of what this was going to be, in the dreaming of what this organization was going to be, we were talking about these topics of land stewardship. And also one of the things that we were considering was trying to find land on the island for us to process food scraps ourselves. And in these conversations about land, I didn't feel like they were complete unless we actually, spoke to the people who this land was stolen from. And so I reached out to the Lenape Center about forging a relationship, and also about a potential name, because, we had kind of thrown around a few different ideas. And one of those had been, what was the indigenous name of this island? Could we name the collective after that? But the Lenape Center actually graciously suggested the name Haki for us, which is Lenape for earth, as well as ground and land and dirt. So we're really honored to have that name. And that kind of ties back to why it was part of why it was so essential for us to do, a community reflection around Indigenous Peoples Day, for us to ask questions like, what is our role in the history of this country, and what do we owe to each other, and what do we owe to the native people of this land? But other examples of, community building that we've done are that we have active meditations. One of our volunteers is a certified yoga instructor, and so she has put on free yoga sessions, and with those we're really trying to unpack, what yoga has become in kind of the Western world. In the United States, we're trying to, open it back up to the people, its heritage, and not appropriate it. But those are just a few examples of the things that we've done and that we're working on.
That's so amazing. I really appreciate the integration between having activities to do to work with the land and like get your hands really dirty in the process, but also like and dirty in the sense of like, you know what I mean, dirty in the sense of being reconnected. Not that the process itself is dirty. I think we got to complicate that a little bit personally, but I think I appreciate the integration between that and honoring this legacy of people and this legacy of land. I think it can be a really difficult thing to do in a U.S. context, especially where there isn't very much knowledge or awareness around where these processes come from. Some of these like sacred ancestral processes come from, or the land that they were performed on. So I think it's really dope to have forged that relationship with the Lenape Center and sort of been able to create that sense of acknowledgement. And so something that I am curious about we'd love to hear from both of you. What are some of the challenges that you've faced with this initiative? And this can be either personal or with the org itself. Is there anything that comes up when you think about the journey and what obstacles you've had to sort of come up against?
Dawit, you want to jump in?
All right, I can jump in there. I thought that might be an interesting intersection for Danica to point out something. But I guess one of the more recent, big challenges that we faced was our partner, Big Reuse, has a composting facility site under the Queensboro Bridge in Queens, New York. And they were actually getting ready to get shut down by the municipality. I think it was on December 21st. But with a lot of efforts and organizing and rallying and sending letters off to the governor's office, to the mayor's office, we managed to actually stop the composting site from being shut down. And there hasn't been, I guess, a concrete decision to keep it open, but I know that it's going to be open until about June. I guess Danica can go in more detail into that. But separate from, that was a really big thing, because if they got shut down, then we would have to really rethink where are we going to be dropping off all of our food scraps. So that was like a really big W. And I'm going to let Danica kind of go and explain a little bit more about that. But separate from that, I guess just some logistical things like, we have our partner Big Reuse that provides us with toters and picks up our food scraps every Saturday, and just making sure that there's space for the truck to be able to park in the middle of the street, in the middle of the traffic that's going on, just coordinating with the driver, making sure that we can get the resources that we need, and working in between everybody's schedules to be able to make sure that we have volunteers and people who are able to show up for the shifts that we have. So, but separate from that, there's been a lot of support from everybody on the team to pick up the slack wherever it drops off. So it's kind of felt, I'm not going to say it's felt effortless, because it's definitely a laborious task, but we have a strong team. And I like to give this metaphor that if the Haki Compost Collective and the Roosevelt Island community was like on a ship out at ocean on volatile waters, Danica would be at the front of the ship with a compass, with a climate change document, binoculars, a shotgun, ready to get us to shore safely. So anytime we've kind of had troubles in terms of figuring out the logistics of our partnership with Big Reuse and just really how to keep this movement still living and alive, she's always kind of picked up that slack. So I'm gonna let her kind of take it from there.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that analogy. That was beautiful. I'm gonna have to write that in my notes. But wow, in terms of struggles, what Dawit was alluding to was just kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the fight that compost has had over the last several months. I mean, in terms of our interactions with the local government, you know, starting in June when that's when the New York City Council and the mayor kind of renegotiate the budget for the next fiscal year. They were ready to slash composting funding from the budget completely. And so we had something upwards of $25 million in the last fiscal year, and only because of the advocacy that, you know, our community and the entire New York City composting community did, we managed to save 2.8 million, which is better than nothing, but is still, you know, a huge blow. And so that was a big push that we had to do over the summer. And then, you know, for some reason they can't just give compost a break. They gotta keep us on our toes. And so as Dahlia was saying, our partner, Big Reuse, who actually processes the food scraps into compost for us, the Parks Department, actually, the New York City Parks Department, was threatening to evict our partner, Big Reuse, from their processing site. And so back in December, yeah, a bunch of us, over 200 people, something like that, testified before the city council on behalf of Big Reuse, as well as the Lower East Side Ecology Center, which is also being threatened with eviction. And out of that hearing, we managed to get a 6-month extension on the lease, so through June, but they're still kind of bent on evicting Big Reuse, so that's a battle we're still fighting. And as Dawit mentioned, if they are evicted, the question then becomes, where do we take our food scraps? And while there are technically options, you know, of where Big Reuse could locate to, the trouble is that those locations may be so far away that, one, it'll create logistical issues for Big Reuse to operate, in terms of, you know, driving, and like they only have, I think, 2 drivers at the moment, and they might need to kind of, you know, up that in order to travel the distances that they would need to go. But even more pressing is that, you know, if we have to truck our food scraps, you know, all the way to Staten Island or wherever, those trucks that are carrying the food scraps are going to be, you know, are going to be emitting greenhouse gases as well, to the point where it might almost make, you know, doing this work of collecting the food scraps moot. And so that's a huge thing that we're struggling with at the moment. It's, again, been a lot of letter writing, petition signing, testifying. That's been a wild ride. And then, I mean, I feel like just as Dawit mentioned, kind of in the day-to-day, we face a lot of struggles as well of just, you know, I'm proud of the 19 volunteers that we have, but, you know, as winter comes and it gets cold and you got to stand outside for this work, you know, that's not the easiest thing for everybody. And so, you know, volunteers can get a little bit sparse. Our numbers can get a little sparse. So we're still trying to, you know, build out that team, as well as trying to figure out how to best, you know, distribute the work across our team members. Because I know some of us core folks we're really pulling a lot of weight, which is amazing. And as Dawit mentioned, you know, we have really incredible team members that we're working with, but I really want the again, organization to kind of be as democratic and horizontal as possible. And so that's something that we're working on, of, you know, trying to empower others to be leaders and to take on more responsibilities. And then even, you know, the issue of kind of diversity and inclusion, that for, I think, a long time, it's starting to change, which is amazing. And this is something that we're working on. But I think for a long time, kind of composting and dropping off your food scraps, at least in the most visible sense, like at these food scrap drop-off sites, has been very much, you know, a white-centric activity. We have, I would say that the majority of our participants in the past have definitely been elderly white people. And I tell all our volunteers, we absolutely love our elderly white people. We love them. You know, we do this for them, but we just also want the rest of the community to be involved too. And so it's a huge question of, how do we reach those communities, and what is it that we're doing wrong that they're not participating? And that's a huge thing that I guess I want to talk about, because a huge thing that we focus on, that Dawit and I, you know, talk about, is, you know, how do we do outreach into different communities, into diverse communities? And so often people think that if you put on your program and you say all are welcome, then you did your due diligence, and then it's just why aren't people showing up, right? But when you think about the fact that everything in this society is set up for white people, that the default is white people, that everything that you do automatically is oriented around white people, that if you want to counteract that, then at every step of the way of that, you know, for a project or a solution that you're trying to come to, at every step of the way, you need to ask yourself, how do I diverge from the default? How do I do something different so that I make sure that I am actively inviting people so that they know that they are welcome and that this space is actually safe? And so that's a huge thing that we've been running into and are constantly working on and, you know, improving at and still struggling with.
Absolutely. Thank you for both of those points that you made, a lot of points that you made, but the discussion that you guys have created, because I think that it's a real challenge to understand how so many communities intertwine. We have such a multiplicity that exists, especially in New York, where there are so many people of so many different origins, so many different cultures all in one space, and a lot of different cultural practices as well. And that just goes beyond not the nuance of individual cultures from all over the world being in one space, but also the idea of like, how do we create our own culture within New York City? What does that look like? You know, and I think that that can be really challenging in trying to understand and work with other people and navigate how they feel about particular things, especially when you're already coming from the position of the other. Like, I think that that is ultimately the idea, especially I think all of us can relate to this at some point or another in our community organizing. We have had to address the fact that the reason we have to community organize is because we are this, even though that might not be true. The reason we're community organizing is because we think we should build community. But I think that, I mean, this is going to be a challenging question that I'm going to ask because it's going to step into a little bit of a broader topic of environmental justice and the environmental justice movement as a whole. But I do want to ask like how you or your thoughts on combating apathy in our communities, because I do think that it's something that we all struggle with, especially with the idea of climate change being something that is very big. And for people who are not as educated about the climate change process, not as educated about what's going on, not in a negative way, but just do not have the information about it, there can be a lot of apathy surrounding, okay, well, what can I do? I am just one person. Or I don't even make enough money to like buy fresh food, or I don't have access to fresh food because my market doesn't offer it. That food is 3 or 4 days old because they get it from the nicer supermarket down further down in Manhattan or whatnot. So you have kind of layers upon layers of oppression that feed into a sense of, you know, psychological depression over certain movements that are happening that feel like they're intangible to certain people. So I think that, I mean, it's a massive question, so I don't expect like a straight answer, I'm sorry. But I think that it's something that's worth talking about and worth kind of exploring a little bit, especially because these are the kinds of things that, you know, we're trying to communicate through Luta and having a conversation, making things accessible to our communities. How can this become a kitchen table conversation, or how can composting become a kitchen table conversation, which is essentially where we're getting to, is moving out of apathy and making it accessible. Does the question make sense?
I guess I'll jump in there. That's a really big question, like you said. And I'm gonna try my best, I guess, to give my response and my reaction to it. All right, so good. Sorry, threw me off for a second there. But I guess first of all, from my own personal experience, some of the challenges that I faced in terms of just getting involved into the environmental activism movement was one of the main challenges was first not seeing too many people of color involved in creating sustainable food systems, involved in health and wellness, involved in composting. That's still something I'm really working on through and making sure that I can stay grounded in literature from people like Leah Penniman or just different academics in the past who played a great role in kind of moving the environmental justice movement forward from the POC community. And I think first of all, you kind of have to like look at the situation outside of yourself. And I feel like when you're doing activism work or social justice work, there's like a certain level of patience, I guess, that you have to like inject into the work that you're doing. And not maybe the results that you might be looking for in terms of like maybe in a more practical level. Like when I was working with Grow NYC and 125th Street Harlem, you know, the brothers and sisters up there they just didn't have the time to really engage in a majority of them didn't have the time to the mental capacity and time to think about food scrap drop-offs, because they were trying to think about where their next meal is coming from. They were trying to figure out how are they going to process this trauma that's been passed on to them from their parents and their parents' parents. How are they going to make sure they don't pass that on to their children? And what I can say though, that food scrap drop-off site for the families and individuals who were kind of able to handle all that trauma and the challenges that they were facing, that compost drop-off site was the light of their day. When they would show up 7 a.m. on their way to work and they could drop off their food scraps and see something in their community that's positive. I mean, like, it's crazy when you step into some of these communities and you're like, where is the sanitation department? Why is there waste all over the place? Why does it smell like toxic fumes are everywhere? You know, like it makes it so hard to even be able to make time for things separate from you just trying to be gainfully employed for yourself. So I think first things first is that Danica, mentioned this before, is that these are essential services that every community deserves access to. And that's at the core of environmental justice. Every community deserves access to clean air, clean water, clean soil, an indoor and outdoor built environment that is conducive to creating a healthy life. And I think that right now in this movement, just getting that running and off the ground with people who are ready to engage in that work is already a big victory. And just to kind of connect it to what your dialogue series is about in terms of the struggle continues, is like we struggle to discontinue the struggle. We hope that the next generation of climate activists, environmental justice activists are not going to be having to push in for policies that ensure that the next time an industrial waste facility is built, it's not going to be built in a low-income POC neighborhood. That hopefully 20 years down the line, that next generation can be able to pick up off where we left off and be able to move that forward. So I think that just making sure that we get those essential services on the ground running. And even though there is low engagement in those communities, for those people who do engage, it means the world, and we can't devalue that. It's like if you're an artist and you have one fan versus 1,000 fans, it doesn't change. That one fan deserves that same amount of love and attention. So I think that's one way I would respond to it. And for the people who are engaged in that work, to stay connected. For me, being connected to Danica, being able to, see how passionate she is and how serious she takes this work with strategy and tactics is rejuvenating for me to know that, all right, I have somebody on my side I can lean on when, I get a little bit discouraged, because it's a hard thing when you don't see people who look like you're engaged in that space. It's very discouraging. You don't feel like you belong there. And I think that even in my experience with activism, like when I was at the new school, I noticed that when it came on to activism, a lot of the brothers and sisters from the POC community were more involved in like housing reform or police brutality. But when it came on to like food, that was really like a white people thing, And it's really not, because our ancestors taught us that food is medicine and medicine is food. And we just have to prepare ourselves for, a battle to go ahead, to know that, there's a quote that I wanted to connect what your dialogue series, the struggle continues, is that there's a quote that says, the harder the battle, the sweeter the victory, and the more challenging, what we're trying to do is, and the more we push towards it, the more rewarded we're going to feel. And I think I see myself, and I can maybe speak for Danica too, that she sees herself as connected to a lineage of people who are doing this kind of work. So, whenever the spirits are down, whenever maybe our brothers and sisters are looking at us like we're crazy, sometimes you have to have a light heart to it as well, and have to know that, all right, if I got 5-10 people to drop off their food scraps today and 45 people ignoring me, that's all right. You know what I mean? I know what they're going through. and I'm willing to be patient because I know that it took time to build this colonial capitalistic structure, and it's going to take time to break down. So, yeah.
Beautiful, amazing. And that last part, you said it. We just got to put in the work. The struggle continues, you know. But let's see how to address apathy. I mean, I think a lot of it is, let me start over, that the community building is actually at the core of the work, right? That we say, oh, like we're called Haki Compost Collective, and we, you know, the primary thing that we do is this composting, but really at the core of it is the community building. That's what has people coming out every day, because they're doing it for each other. You know, people are bringing out their food scraps because they're doing it because they want, you know, a safe and healthy planet, livable planet for their children, right? And they want it for their, and you know, the person that they see at the food scrap drop-off site, because those are the types of conversations that I actively have with people every weekend, where we talk about these things, of these fears about what's going to happen and how do we address them. But when we all come together and we build that hope together through conversation and through the work that we're doing, I think that's what draws people in. And so I think it's, how do you get over the apathy of maybe not being able to pay so much attention to, you know, the environmental aspect of it specifically, is that you draw people in through the people, you know, with through the community building that work that you're doing, so that you can actually give back to each other in a way that seems like you're building this community that cares. And I think, you know, kind of what Anya was talking about earlier with you know, this estrangement from nature. I think that is huge, and that's something that we need to work on, because I believe very much that the way that we treat nature is so very tied to the way that we treat each other as human beings, and vice versa. And so I think creating opportunities for people to reconnect with nature through this food scrap drop-off site is another way to get people to then care about each other and want to do this work. That when, you know, every Saturday on our table, we have a bucket of finished compost, which just, you know, looks like dirt. But it's the most exciting thing when a child comes up to that table and they see that dirt and they want to touch it and they want to smell it, because they're reconnecting with the thing that gives them life, right? And I think that spark of excitement in people of reconnecting with the planet is what gets them, you know, passionate about doing this work, because suddenly they remember what they're here for. You know, suddenly they remember that they're part of something bigger, that they're part of this network of life, you know, on this living being that is our planet, with all of these other living beings who are our family, you know, our friends, our neighbors, all of these people around us, that we're here doing this together. And so I think reforging that connection with the land and, you know, with all of the living beings around us is gonna be pivotal in, you know, moving away from this capitalist individualistic mindset and more towards community of wanting to all do this together for each other. I don't know if any of that made any sense.
It made total sense.
Oh,
Thank you both for your responses. I'm like soaking all of that in, all of that wonderful information and reflection. I also have been thinking about how to combat apathy, and or even just fatigue. Like maybe you care, but you just, you know, really are having a hard time finding it in yourself to perform, to like be present in this work. And I keep coming back to the notion too that maybe this isn't something that we necessarily have to start doing, because it's like, it's, if Black and brown people know how to do anything, it's sustain. Like we just have to return to the things that helped get us through and amend them and adapt to what's happening now. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to say thank you for answering that, because I think it's a really important question, and we all gotta sort of gauge that engage that fire again, like reignite that fire. So yeah.
absolutely. Thank you. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time because I recognize that we're across at least 3 different time zones. And I know it's getting late for Doit over there. But yeah, to kind of bring us to some sort of a conclusion, I definitely want to ask a question that is more oriented towards a like tangible action for people to get involved in the Haki Compost Collective and or how they can support you. We want to emphasize that Luta is also about community building and about networking. So this is also a space in which you get to network and meet people. And we're hoping people in the comments will freak out and be like also excited about joining and participating, but definitely like want to ask some ways of how people can get involved, even if they're not on Roosevelt Island, perhaps what are kind of, things that you did in trying to create a compost collective in your own space, because we are a global community. Again, trying to make it relevant for people too, in terms of trying to communicate compost as an essential service to their communities. Even just in that, I think we had a wonderful lesson earlier. But yeah, exactly, very good point, especially during COVID. It seems like everything's on pause, everything's on hold right now. And I don't know that it's entirely true. I mean, you've obviously proven that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, what are ways that people can support you, like with specifically the Haki Compost Collective, but also take what you have done and expand upon it into their own initiatives.
Oh, it is your turn.
I guess the most direct way to get engaged with the Haki Compost Collective, I mean, we have a social media Instagram page. So I guess following the Instagram page is one way to kind of, and it's, that Instagram page is fire. Danica really bring a lot of soul and color and life and, artistic design to it. I'll have to make a song for Haki Compost Collective at some point. But the Instagram page is the best way to really kind of just get the updates on where the food scrap drop-off site is, when we're operating, who's involved, if you're trying to find out how to get involved or volunteer. Any one of us will respond to the DMs as soon as you send it your way through. If you're in the greater New York area, I know that you can go on Grow NYC's website, and they kind of have like a little bit of a map to kind of show what are the different food scrap drop-off sites that are still operating. And they also have some information in regards to, what is compostable, what is not compostable, where can you store your food scraps. So without going into detail and explaining that, that website will kind of give you, you'll have the time and space to do that research and to find it all there. And it's pretty simple and easy to find. So for anybody in the New York area, if you want to learn more about Haki Compost Collective, check out the Instagram page, follow, like, love, share, and check out Grow NYC's page, check out Big Reuse's page, check out the Lower East Side Ecology Center's page. These are all great environmental education organizations that are doing the composting work, diverting food scraps out of landfills, and can kind of, bring some small tips into how you can be able to do that within your home. And I guess in terms of if you want to start your own compost collective, get together with your friends, your family members who feel as if, not who feel as if, but who I guess are maybe in a place and a space to be able to facilitate that kind of work. And I'm sure that if you DM us, that we can, set up a time to have a conversation and share how we kind of got our compost collective running. So, Danica.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're happy to chat with whoever, because as you can tell, we just like talking. So, hit us up and we will share, all of the things that we have learned through these challenges so far. And I'll also follow up that our handle on Instagram is Haki Compost. So HAKI Compost, COMPOST. So give us a follow there so you can keep up with all of the latest initiatives that we've got going on. And if you're in the New York City area, definitely come by, whether you want to volunteer or if you just want to hang out, that's fine too. That's a big, goal of ours of, perpetuating that water cooler, watering hole atmosphere of just come hang out and share your ideas, because that's what it's about. But then I would say outside of, Haki Compost specifically, in terms of, what you can do wherever you are in the world, for one, especially if you are in, the so-called United States, you need to figure out whose native land you are on, and you need to go build those connections. That means you know, finding the groups that, you know, they may be on social media. A lot of different, you know, groups are organizing online, and you can connect with them and you can support what they're already doing. You know, there's people at, you know, the border that are fighting border wall construction. There have been people, you know, fighting against all of these pipelines that the government is trying to build, and these, you know, oil companies are trying to build. You can go support those actions, and that is a huge aspect of environmental justice. And then I would also say, in a different vein, I would look up and connect with farmers of color in your area. Something that I happen to know about pretty well, because I got to write a feature on it for my full-time job, is the Black Farmers Index, or it might be Black Farmer, no, Black Farmers Index. And that actually is the largest, most comprehensive free compilation of Black farmers around the country, and it's organized by region. And so you can go in and look for your, you know, state and find all of the Black farmers in your area. I did that for New York, and I followed all of them on Instagram and support them, because, you know, Black farmers are doing a whole heck of a lot to counteract climate change in terms of, you know, the farming practices that they're using. But also, these are the people that have been the bedrock of this country, but have also been shunted and ignored and worse by this country. And so, you know, what we can all do, if you have the power and if you have that privilege, to spread your resources, you know, and support those people. That's my piece.
Thank you both so much. Absolutely. And we'll definitely tag these also in our comments, so people can check them out and definitely be able to join in the conversation. We would love to hear more from people. If you have people you want us to follow, to bring into our network, if you would like to shout anybody out, please do so in the comments. This is definitely the space and the time to do it. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you back soon for updates on how things are going. Is there any closing thoughts, anything anyone would like to say? Other than the plane in the background, don't mind.
Just a big thank you to all of you for engaging in this conversation. You know, I'm glad that these, I feel like these conversations are starting to happen more and more. And so I wanna have them all the time. So call me tomorrow.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you as well. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, just riffing off that. Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like we're raising vibrational frequency, and for me, you know, it's really important to be involved in these kind of dialogues and conversations. And yeah, hit me up anytime. You know, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in Senegal. I'm ready to make it happen. So yeah, thank you, and thank you for the work that you both are doing too, in terms of, you know, that's a very powerful statement, that the struggle continues. You know, and we're all so young too. We're all in our early 20s, and we have so much time ahead of us, God willing. You know, nothing's guaranteed, but I think that we're all, you know, in the right steps moving forward. So it's good to be part of this community.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. Again, yes, please follow at Haki Compost on Instagram. Follow us at aluta_dialogues on Instagram, and look out for our panel, which will be happening towards the end of the month and will be airing on Facebook Live, extension of this conversation with these lovely folks. And we'll catch y'all later.